Welcome to Students of Aging, the podcast that honors the incredible journeys and stories of seniors growing older. Tune in and become a part of our community as we redefine what it means to age gracefully and purposefully.
I just felt I was living in this world and participating in it. I never felt it was anything special.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Young. I'm a member of the Seniors Advisory Council here at Wood Green Community Services. Our members are creating and producing a series of podcasts entitled Students of Aging. These podcasts are funded by the Government of Canada. The podcasts will address issues pertinent to older adults. If you are a new viewer or listener, welcome. If you have been with us before, welcome back. Today, my guest is Sheila Miller. Sheila is you're also a member of the Seniors Advisory Council. Sheila has a phenomenal life story to tell, and what we'd like to do today is share some elements from it. Sheila, can you tell us where and when you were born and how old you are?
Well, you can figure that out.
I'll try.
The age I was born. I was born in Chicago in 1931, March. So I'm approaching my 94th birthday. My father was a Torontonian, though, and I had a large family because he came from a family of 7 siblings. But he went to medical school in Chicago, met my mother, who was barely 18, wouldn't leave home, and so he settled there and started his practice and his family. But I also had a large family in Chicago because my mother also came from a family of 7 siblings. So I was counting with remarriages because of death and so forth. I had 26 uncles and aunts, and I had over 40 first cousins, and I knew every single one of them.
Wow.
It was a very large and very loving family. I was fortunate. Extremely.
Yes. What was it like growing up in Chicago?
It was interesting. Many of my mother's brothers and her sister and my grandmother lived within walking distance. So I had a very full family that, and my grandmother lived with us for many years, so it became the focal point where the family came to visit their mother, their grandmother, and I just remember a household full of people, and my mother fortunately loved to entertain and cook. So there was always lots of food and lots of people. And my father's youngest sister moved to Chicago from Toronto with her husband because she was very connected to her brother. And she and my uncle and 3 cousins lived in the same apartment building for many years. So it was a very full household. And the relatives actually played a bigger part than playmates because my playmates were my relatives.
So what did little Sheila Miller do for fun back in the day?
Oh, if we weren't in school, we were outside, even in the cold weather. We were playing tag, we were playing Mother May I, we were ice skating, and we would wait for our mothers to call us in for dinner. They would hang out the front windows and call us, and we would run in for dinner. We didn't sit home and watch television because there wasn't any television. In fact, my father bought the first television set on our block in about 1967 or 8 to keep my grandmother occupied, who was then bedridden and loved to watch wrestling.
At Sydney Stadium, the wrestling season opens. And how? Down for the first time is Billy Hansen
And the
wearing
baseball game. And when I told her how much baseball players make, she said, "Oh, only in America."
My grandmother loved to watch wrestling too.
And oh yeah, and she would cover her eyes and say, "Oh, they're hurting each other," and then she would peek through her fingers. It was she was very adorable, actually.
So your dad was not just a doctor, he was politically quite active, I
My
understand.
father was. My father really started his practice among the steel workers of South Chicago, and he really supported the drive to unionize the steel workers. And I have vivid memories of soup kitchens, picket lines.
He would take you with?
Oh, yes. I spent a lot of time hanging out with my dad as he drove around because he made house calls.
Yeah.
You know, you could walk into a house and take a sniff and say, "Oh, you've got chicken pox here. You've got measles here." I talked to a neurologist once here in Toronto who said, "Oh, yeah, the old timers can do that. We can." And the Republic Steel Strike of 1937 was very important in my memory because that's where the picket line and soup kitchen experience came from. But it's also where the Republic Steel Strike massacre of May 31st, which is Memorial Day, 1937, happened in Chicago, where the police and hired security shot peaceful demonstrators. They killed 10 strikers, wounded many, many more, and my father was one of the two doctors who attended the injured and the dying, and actually went to Congress in the fall of 1937 to testify. And the Congress in those days declared it was a misuse of force by the steel company. There is a book, has the character partially based on my father, called Citizens by Meyer Levin. And he based the doctor in the story on the two young doctors that attended the strikers. And my father was a communist. In the 30s, there were many people who looked at communism and socialism as a way to a more just world. I mean, their hopes were shattered, but in those days, they were very real, and the adults I remembered were very kind and loving.
Mm-hmm. My mother was a secretary for the Communist Party in Toronto.
I mean, it was a time of hope.
Yes, kind of. Yeah.
But I also, in terms of Chicago, it wasn't local politics I was aware of as a child. It was the political world of the larger universe. It was what was happening in China.
Wow.
It was what was happening in Spain, in Ethiopia, and then in Europe with the Second World War. That was much more of what occupied the adults that I knew and the conversations that went on.
And did your dad make sure that to keep you aware of world events?
Oh, yes. Yeah. We listened to the news together every evening when he was home for dinner, before his evening office hour. My father wanted to go to Spain during the Civil War. My mother absolutely put her foot down and said, "No way."
Tell me about being a red diaper baby.
Well, in the U.S., the children of parents who were of left persuasions were called that. We were called red diaper babies, red being the color of the left in those days. My parents' friends were all involved in left-wing politics, and their children were my closest friends. I grew up with 3 other little girls. I'm the last one, but we all grew up in families that were left-wing.
Was it dangerous?
That was not dangerous. What was dangerous being Jewish. I had more issue over that because my family grew up. My father put us in a neighborhood that was not particularly Jewish deliberately. He wanted us to have a more international
Sure.
experience of
Sure.
people. There were only 2 Jewish children in the very large Chicago public school that I went to.
And there was
I
anti-Semitism?
was taunted, yes, very much. I was taunted.
Do you remember any of the language that was used?
It was like dirty Jew, you smell, and I was very little at the time. I was like 5 and 6, and I didn't know what they were
Yeah,
talking
exactly.
about. I remember when the atom bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. I was a teenager, young teenager. I was in despair. I sobbed and sobbed because I knew the world and the way it would solve its problems had changed forever, and it wasn't a change for the good. My mother introduced me to a library when I was very young, and I have vivid memories of sitting at a Chicago Public Library, which was a branch on a main street on the corner in a storefront, actually, and sitting next to the window and the sun pouring over my shoulder onto the print. I couldn't read, but I could see the pictures, and I was fascinated by the print. And that was a very strong memory. I also have memories of hanging out with the older kids on the block and walking to the Grand Crossing Railroad Station, where the city of New Orleans came in at least, I think it was twice a week. And I would stand with the older kids on the platform, which was wooden, and it began to shake before we could hear the train. And I would get so excited because the train was coming in, and it was enormous. And people came off it dressed up, carried luggage. It was very exciting. And my love of travel started there.
Speaking of travel, eventually you came to Toronto.
Well, I was involved in the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King and the marches for open housing in Chicago. We were surrounded by screaming, angry people who were throwing bricks and cherry bombs, and I was rooted in fear. I literally had to force my feet to move. And with the anti-war movement during the Vietnam War, and life became very, very difficult. And the children and I spent a summer in the country and talked about next moves. And we had a loving family in Canada, and we had spent many vacations here.
Sure.
And we decided that's where we wanted to go.
You and the draft dodgers.
Right, exactly. A tax refuser for that portion
Good
of
for
my
you.
tax that went to war. I believe in taxes to help us with our education, with our transportation, with our health care, with social needs. But I was not going to pay the portion. So I was being somewhat harassed by the Treasury Department. Can I tell this story?
Yes.
Okay. The day after Trump's first victory, Ellen, my daughter, called me and said, "Mom, thank you. You did the best thing in moving us to Canada."
And are you a Canadian citizen?
I am. I
Nice.
am a Canadian. I was a dual citizen as soon as I could become one.
Right.
And I now am a full Canadian. I renounced American.
Yeah.
I am a Canadian.
Did your activism carry on in this country?
It did, but it also changed. I found opportunities in Toronto. Toronto was on the move when I moved in the early 70s. A lot of immigrants were coming in. Programs and services were being funded, and I was fortunate enough to be part of just initiating a whole bunch of important things. The first spring, I was hired to totally outfit and start and run a preschool in the Peanut off of Don Mills, the Peanut Plaza, Advent Lutheran Church, which is still going. From there, I organized with a friend, wrote a proposal, and we got funded for the first toy lending library in Canada. And we were across from the Dufferin Grove Library, and we got a lot of support from the librarians. And from there, I moved to Jesse's Center for Teenagers. I
Wow.
was on the incorporating board and then the first staffing group there. And from there, I went to organize a women's center that operated out of Bathurst Street United Church. And from that, I went to Homes First and was involved in Street City, which got international interest, and we had people from all over the world. And I was responsible for developing the women's part, and this was 36 women and 36 men, homeless men, who actually designed with the architect their housing in an old warehouse in the distillery district.
In the 70s.
Yeah, it was the 70s. Yeah. And from there, I was hired by the City of Toronto to work on the issues of homeless women. And so I just met wherever homeless women were. I met in drop-in centers. I met in places that they could live in and exist in, and shelters. And we just talked about what would make it possible for them to be housed.
That was about 30 years ahead of its time.
Well, and I took down their words as they said it. And I said to them, I would read it back and I would say, is this accurate? And then I would bring their words back to the city government, to the developers, to the builders. This is what women are saying. They need to feel safe. Because the one thing that's not discussed very often in our discussions of homelessness is violence. Mm-hmm. We will never, ever get rid of homelessness unless we get rid of violence. There will always be women and children escaping violence. Yeah. There will be men and youth escaping violence. We have to have a safe world if we're going to get rid of homelessness. It's not just enough housing. It's much more and much more complicated.
And we have to look at the root causes, not the symptoms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How did you feel back then? Did you feel like you were a radical? Did you feel like you were a post-hippie?
I just felt I was living in this world and participating in it. I never felt it was anything special. It was just what was and what needed to be done. And the thing that I learned from my father was to make social change, you have to be positive that change can happen. Unless you have a vision and can see the possibility of change, you can't make it. And it's hard to hold on to that in these days.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. So it sounds like you brought a big part of your dad to Toronto with you.
Absolutely. And the other thing is my mother, who was somewhat political when I was very young, as her family increased and grew and so forth, she became more homebound. But what I learned from her was a love of people. As my father had that love, but my mother did too. Yeah. She loved to take care of them and feed them and have them in her home. I learned different things in different ways. Of course. The same thing in different ways from my parents. I was very fortunate.
Did your father live long enough to see your successes in this country?
No. He died in 1970. We came in January. He died the following October, Halloween Day.
Do you think women today are different than when you were?
I think yes and no. I think women are different because they see more opportunities.
Yes.
And they see entitled to have those opportunities. My generation still struggled to be other than the homemaker or the teacher or the librarian. Those were the options. You know, I was interested in being a doctor, and I was so discouraged from it. And
By whom?
my father,
Really?
right, he said it's too hard
Oh.
for women, and it probably was in those days. And he did not want me to be a nurse because nurses are not valued by doctors.
So what kind of education did you have?
I went to the University of Chicago Laboratory School for my last year of high school.
You were young, weren't you?
I was 14.
14.
And I went to University of Chicago for undergraduate.
When you were 15.
Yes.
You went to university when you were 15.
That was a special program. The 15-year-olds entered along with the returning vets from the Second World War, who were mostly married men with children. And so it was an odd combination of teenagers and what we considered old men. So that I went to Roosevelt to get a degree in teaching. And then I went to the Erickson Institute of Early Childhood Education, which was connected to Loyola to
Okay.
get my early childhood. They were 4 hard years. There was a lot of studying. Our exams were 6-hour exams. It was hard. So I took a year off and went to the Chicago Actors Group. And it was a semi-professional theater group at a school, and studied with a woman called Minnie Gallitzer. Oh, I had fun. I did, but my parents were not happy. I gave in to them.
And then you taught? Did you teach?
I taught in daycare. I taught in nursery schools, but I also taught early childhood at the community college level here. I taught at Centennial and Seneca and George Brown.
How's your family now?
My family is lovely. I'm very fortunate. I have 3 children. I have the daughter I birthed, the daughter who married into the family, and the son that I adopted as a 10-day-old from the hospital. And they are all fabulous adults, very political,
Yes.
caring, smart
Yes.
people. So I'm very fortunate. I don't have grandchildren, but there are 4 generations of children in the family.
Wow.
So I have nieces and nephews, great nieces and nephews, great nieces and nephews, and I maintain connection with them.
Yeah.
We have family reunion. This fall I was in Chicago, and I would go to Ames, Iowa, where my brother and sister-in-law and some of their family are. And then every other year we have a family reunion on my father's side with the nieces and nephew and the great nieces and nephews in New Jersey. So this summer, coming summer, is another family reunion.
Do you have any advice for your younger self?
I wish I had paid more attention to the elders in my life. I wish I had listened to them, asked them, but you're so busy living your life that it isn't until hindsight that you think, I would have been better prepared if I had really listened, had really asked. And that's the thing that I regret the most, that I didn't ask my mother, my father, and my grandmother more about what it was like for them growing older. Present takes precedence.
Precedent, for sure. Do you ever think about legacy, your legacy?
My legacy is all the projects that I have been fortunate to be part of. There's a building in Toronto called the Sheila Miller Building. I don't usually talk about it, but I worked a year and a half on that building with a group of women from the YMCA apartment building on La Pape and Front. Is it just talking about housing and what has worked for them and what doesn't work for them, and then I worked with a young woman architect student on her thesis. She worked with our group and developed plans, and based on those plans, we developed the building. The building is an apartment building. It's 1 and 2 bedroom apartments for women and with children escaping violence.
Homes First. The Sheila Miller Building is one of our supportive housing sites. It is a 5-story brick and concrete apartment building with a total of 22 units, including 9 2-bedroom units, 7 1-bedroom units, 3 bachelor units, and 3 1-bedroom accessible units. The Sheila Miller Building is in the St. Jamestown area and typically serves women fleeing domestic violence and adults who may have mobility issues. Homes First has been operating a housing program here for over 27 years.
The legacy is my children and their involvement in the world and trying to make it a kinder, better world.
Same way you have. Well, Sheila, from the moment I met you, I was so impressed with your wit and your charm and your intellect.
And I'm with you.
The work you've done over your life and the attitude you have to your life right now is motivational.
My name is Sheila, and I'm approaching my 94th birthday.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing content every week. If you want to catch more of our adventures, check out the videos right here on our YouTube channel. And remember to leave a comment below. Let us know what you think or what you'd like to see next. We love hearing from you. Catch you in the next one.